Most likely you have been told a lie. Buy a home, hold it for 30 years, retire rich, and be free. That couldn't be further away from the truth. You're getting into a 30-year bondage with a bank and with your government. You barely keep up with inflation, and you are 100% depending on the location you choose, and a lot can happen in 30 years. Bitcoin is the new way to build generational wealth. And my guest today, Ella, did understand that. And she now works at Strategy's Bitcoin team, where they now have over 3.5% of the total supply. She also gave recently an amazing TEDx talk, which I absolutely loved. So enjoy. How's it been with working with Strategy? It's even though Strategy is such a huge company and such a huge talking point in the overall Bitcoin ecosystem. I think it sounds weird, but Michael Saylor might just be the only employee out of except you that has been on my podcast. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe I had like one or two that I'm not aware of but I think Michael Saylor was the only that was working at Strategy that has been on the podcast. So it would be cool to have some insights from you also how it is with Strategy.
Yeah, well, if that's true, we've got to get the rest of the team on. It's such a gift, truly, to get to work with everyone. So on the Bitcoin team, I'd say there's about 15 of us across finance and legal who put all our time and energy day to day on the Bitcoin side of business. And then the larger company, there's about 1,500 or so employees across 27 offices around the world who focus on the software side of the business, and they're equally as great. It's to graduate from college and to still be able to spend 24/7 thinking about Bitcoin, thinking about where our world is going, and get to be a part of building that future that we all want to see. It's really been a gift, as I mentioned.
That's awesome. So like 15 people are kind of on the Bitcoin focus on the Bitcoin side of things.
Yep. So we have our management team. So as you mentioned, obviously Michael Saylor, and then Fong Li, our CEO, Andrew Kang, our CFO. We have our general counsel, Thomas Chow. And then we have Sharice Jajodia, who's our corporate treasurer. We've got CJ as well, who's the director of IR and product. And then we have our head of capital markets. We have Bhakti Mandavia, who's been a part of the team longer than many of us. She's wonderful, also works on IR. And then, as mentioned, we have everyone on legal and some others on finance as well, who support all the activities.
It's crazy. Like how few people create such a big value. Like if you like calculate what the value is that the Strategy, especially in the Bitcoin ecosystem, is creating, and this is just a couple of people that create all of like that's pretty amazing.
Well, it's all thanks to Bitcoin as well. And I should mention that we have, one of the benefits of Strategy and our presence in this space, and the fact that Strategy has been a publicly traded company for 30 years or so, that also means we have a really wonderful FP&A team that looks at all SEC reporting and makes sure we have clean financial statements. We have our ITS team that helps with the website, the ability to have all these metrics update every 15 seconds. We have the Strategy app. We have our merch store. That's all run by people on the side in addition to their day job. So it's a small group, but it's certainly a big team effort across the board.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. So like you have an ecosystem and Strategy that helps you out outside of the Bitcoin ecosystem with things like the SEC filings with the app and also like all sorts of stuff. Like I thought about it because there's so much to to Strategy
Yep.
in the Bitcoin side.
Yeah, and then we have it's called the Bitcoin Hub. It's a co-working space. So for those that are familiar with maybe Bitcoin Park, it's like that in our office on one of the floors. And so we have a facilities team that helps with all of that. We do educational courses for the whole office so that they understand Bitcoin and they understand digital credit and our Bitcoin strategy. So we have an education team that helps with some of those courses. So it truly is a team effort in many regards.
I was not aware of that. You have an educational team that offers courses and like group, like almost a classroom kind of thing for employees of strategy that might just like develop on some software project or so?
Yep. So historically, the courses have not been, Bitcoin oriented or primarily Bitcoin oriented, just lots of other courses in regards to the software business or other trainings that should be going on. And they are all online, not so much in person. There are select in person classes in our education center. But more recently, we really wanted to make sure that all the employees understood, what is Bitcoin? Why does it matter? Why have we chosen to capitalize the company on Bitcoin? Why is it our treasury reserve asset? And then now, as we chart over the past year, this digital credit, really asset class now, what is that? What does all of this mean? What are we doing? And so we wanted to make sure to kind of ensure everyone's on this journey of education and where we're going with us.
Interesting. Really, really cool. I want to talk about the things that you have been up to since last time, which is has been quite a while, and a lot that you have done. One thing that I've seen actually way before even I contacted you, that you did a TEDx talk, which is like really cool because I was a TEDx. How should I say it? Chunky when I was like 15 to 18, 19 years old, and like I watched so many talks. There was a TEDx form, but there was also like a German version. I think it was called Gedankentanken or something like that, and it just made German things. And those, like I watched so much of that stuff, and I appreciated getting so many inputs. What have you kind of focused your talk on, and to bring those to that TEDx audience?
Absolutely. And, similar to you, I am an avid TEDx talk watcher. I love watching them. I appreciate how you can get a short, learning and it resonates with you. And so when I first transferred to Cornell, I saw that they had a TEDx club. So it's a group of students that put on an event, have the license from TED. And I applied every year. I think I applied 3 times, and third time's a charm. They accepted me my senior year of college. And I probably rewrote this talk maybe 20 plus times. I just kept getting rewritten. That's not good enough. That's not good enough. And if you look at just the space of the talks that have existed kind of about Bitcoin specifically, Neha Narula and Jeremy Rubin have given really good talks. But there had been a gap of time that anyone had really focused on Bitcoin in particular. And so the title of my talk was In Yourself You Trust. And it opens with a story of just from my own life, which I can share, about what made me think not just about Bitcoin, but what's really important. What's the importance of savings? Why does it matter? And then where it ends is that for much of history, we've had to outsource our trust to others to kind of take care of ourselves past retirement, to ensure that we really have dignity and financial freedom. But I wanted, if someone only remembers one thing, that you can trust yourself, you can figure this out, especially for younger audiences and younger generations. So that's why the title was In Yourself You Trust. But it's all about Bitcoin, but the talk actually doesn't mention the word Bitcoin until at least kind of the halfway point or 3/4 in. First, I use some analogies to try to build up the idea of why it's important that Bitcoin is finite, how it helps preserve time, how it helps restore agency, and then conclude more macro level of what this does for relationships and your life and your ability to pursue the future that you would like to live once you graduate college, because this was my target audience, and then just continue on throughout your life.
I think it's also so important, especially like graduating college. I think most of them are Gen Z, I would guess so.
Mhm.
Such an important topic of how Gen Z can look at the world of wealth building. If you look at my parents or even my parents' parents, real estate was a very big part of that. And I don't think real estate cuts it for our generation. I think it's still a tool that you can use to build wealth and to save something, but I think it's a very imperfect one. So I think Bitcoin is the best one that we as Gen Z, and I'm a little bit on the upper limit of Gen Z, but still in there, have in our toolkit to actually save for a better future, because the fiat currencies obviously are horrible at that.
Yep, you're exactly right. And so one of the charts in this TED Talk that everyone loves, Jesse Meyer's chart, where it shows, what is everyone choosing to invest in right now? Obviously, real estate is a huge part of that chart. Art, less so for Gen Z, but art, equities, continue on the list. And I just showed how, for instance, houses, not very durable, a flood could come. Houses, you're not exactly breaking off maybe a tile from your bathroom to pay for your coffee, or that's not really divisible. So try to just really bring it down into the practical day-to-day, and then ladder it back up to how Bitcoin helps fix some of those areas. But I would completely agree with you. At one point, you had also mentioned just how maybe in the short term, the saving and what you're doing feels insignificant. But if you take a pause and then look at the long term, and the benefit of starting to invest early and have the benefits from compounding, what that really looks like. And so that was another point of this talk, and maybe just because I think it's helpful and it's worked well to resonate with some of my friends about the importance of doing this. The reason that I think I first Bitcoin resonated with me, or the idea that we should start saving early, is because when I was about 13ish, my parents, we were sitting kind of at the kitchen table chatting, and I made the comment that I really wanted to be a history major in college. And they said, okay, no, you're going to go to college and you're going to either get like a STEM degree or doctor something, where when you get out, you have a chance at a high salary and the ability to really take care of yourself. And so I think if you just start really early on about what life do you think you might want to live, what goals do you think you might want to have, that helps put some ownership into the process as well, and why you are doing what you're doing. So there are a variety of themes, but my intent was that it's very evergreen, and that it's approachable and relevant for Gen Z.
And you then didn't do your history major, I guess?
Well, so then I joked that in some ways I feel like I did sort of become a history major because I found Bitcoin. Um, but no, I ended up graduating. I started computer science and Chinese, and then I switched over to cognitive science and Bitcoin. It's on my transcript now. When we had chatted before, I think my major was just approved, and then I was embarking on the 2-year process for that. And then I did minors in business, moral psychology, and information science, which is some game theory. So I think, though, and you would probably agree with your 700 plus episodes, that to appreciate Bitcoin and to really learn the problem it's solving, you need to go back into history and see how we got to where we are.
History is such an important thing to look at with Bitcoin, because we forget how technology gets adopted. We forget how massive a technology can change our lives. I mean, it's now easy to say, yeah, like the phone is pretty important, but it's not that long ago that the phone was like invented in all of our hands. I think the phone is a really interesting example, because we still sometimes see movies and series where there was no phone in there, but there was always the TV. There was already, like, you can watch the people, and you kind of had the landline phone before you had the smartphone. And even the landline phone was a huge step to not having the landline phone before. And so I think going back in history and studying those examples of the car, the internet, the electricity, the telegraph, the printing press, all of those things, it's just super fascinating when you actually get to see those. And it hurts me a little bit, because in school I was never really into those things, and then I got out of school, I discovered Bitcoin, and then I restudied all of those things, and I was like, oh, I could have used that time in school better to actually study those things, because it's really pretty fascinating. But you need the context to why it is interesting to actually have an interest in that. So yeah, it's fascinating. It's actually, do you have a favorite thing that you compare Bitcoin to, like something from an event in history that you liked, like this is the most accurate one to compare Bitcoin with?
Well, I think that's kind of just it. There's nothing to compare Bitcoin to necessarily in history. But I will say what I love thinking about Bitcoin as, and what I wrote my thesis on is Bitcoin as a language. Um, so the title of that was Bitcoin, the first language that really discovers, speaks, settles, and preserves truth. And so, but if you just take it really high level, I think that Bitcoin allows us to communicate with all 8 billion people all around the world, um, in a way that's never been possible before. And if you just take it, I know we had mentioned the also freedom forum before we started recording. And so something there that has always resonated with me over, hard to believe, I don't know, the past 5, 6 years is when Alex Gladstein has shared that today, let's say only about 4% of the world is born into, like, let's call it a dominant monetary language. So whether that be like the dollar, or I don't know, the Canadian dollar, or some more relatively stable currency. And so what that means is the majority of the world is not. And they are born into perhaps an authoritarian regime or just some environment where their freedoms are very heavily repressed. And Bitcoin is this way that all 8 billion people can monetarily communicate with each other without friction in a way that no one can debase or kind of take out the meaning. And so, if you think about just going back to language for a second, anytime, let's say you translate from English to Chinese, it's not a perfect one-to-one translation. In that process, you're going to lose some meaning. And maybe, in something like Chinese where the characters hold a lot in them that is then not reflected in English, maybe you gain some if you're going from English to Chinese. But that doesn't need to be the case in money. And even today, if you're just trying to send money from I don't know, the US to China, there's lots of fees and middlemen who extract value in the middle. And so that was just the initial starting point for that thesis inquiry. But that is my favorite, probably way to look at Bitcoin. That's a little bit out there, and in maybe in an analogy form.
I think language is actually fascinating comparison. It's, but why is like why would you say is money a language? Like what is the like overall theme? Is it just Bitcoin, or is it like all money is fiat? Is maybe even gold a form of language then?
Yep, and I'm forgetting how many exactly charts I had in this thesis, so it turned into about a 350-page document, and I think there were somewhere between 30 and 40 different charts answering exactly that question of, okay, well, isn't gold a language? Or isn't couldn't the internet be a language? And as one just, prior when I was thinking about this, I think it was maybe Robert Breedlove who was the first to kind of drive this message into my head about how prices are information. And so you start to think about, okay, what kind of constructs a language? What goes into that? What are they used for? Transferring information. If you also look at the Bitcoin white paper, it describes Bitcoin, so uppercase B, Bitcoin, the whole network, the protocol, as a communications channel without a trusted intermediary. And so all of these different pieces were in my head. I also have just had a long-standing passion of learning languages, and so that's how the dots started to come into my head. But I think I'll go back to the title to specifically answer your question. And my claim was not just that Bitcoin is the only monetary language, because I do think there's others, but rather it's the first one that discovers, speaks, settles, and preserves truth in a unique way that others do not or cannot.
Because it's the only one that doesn't lose information and can't be distorted, kind of.
Yes, yeah. So if you think about discovers, just people broadcasting transactions and going to the mempool, And so if you think about, everyone's people are deciding, oh, if I want to transact with this person or that person, the nodes are seeing this, kind of discovering what's going on. People can kind of speak or express intent to do something or not do something. And anyone, all 8 billion, can do that. Then it's all in the mempool. And then it can settle. Miners add transactions to a block, and then after so odd many confirmations, it's officially settled, all good, and then preserved over time. If we think about Bitcoin as this record of truth, this ledger of truth of what has happened in the past. And so I argue that Bitcoin does this in a very unique way that other languages or ledgers do not.
I love that. And comparing it to language also makes a lot of sense. And then it because, I mean, one thing that this podcast has done over the last 2.5 years, it captured a lot of different stories of how people describe Bitcoin, of how people look at Bitcoin. And there are like a certain kind of patterns in there, and there are similar things in there, of course. But what I always love is if there's a unique angle on Bitcoin that tries to make sense of something that is not that easy to understand, because everyone kind of knows Bitcoin. Like everyone has like that word. If you mention Bitcoin, most likely someone has heard about it before. I've actually had it, I think, like 1 or 2 times that someone heard Bitcoin and like, oh, I don't know what it is. Like, I've never heard that word. I'm like, wait, what? That's crazy that they've never heard it. But it's very rare. But actually, if you can go deeper and ask people a question, okay, do you know something about Bitcoin? Or like, what do you know about Bitcoin? And you ask, like, do you know about block size? Do you know about the blockchain? Can you explain like how things are actually working, just on a high level, not like a coder? 99% of the people have no clue, probably even like higher than that, like 99.5 or so. And so there's a huge discrepancy between people knowing about it and people actually having an understanding for it. And I think we need all those comparisons and frameworks to think about Bitcoin to make them understand what it is without just like looking at everything, like reading the white paper. Most people would read the white paper and would be as smart as before because it doesn't explain well, like why is it such a great money. If you can read it, great, but not everyone can read it that great. And so there's a great value in having those comparisons and those kind of like reference points towards Bitcoin.
And to your point, I think it's enough, absolutely, for people to just think of Bitcoin as capital or as money. But in my setting, what I really wanted to do, as to my knowledge, the first person to study Bitcoin in undergrad, and this came through Femi Longe at HRF. He introduced me to this framework of thinking about research and communication. And the important piece is that he said, Ella, you've got to dive into the unknown. You've got to dive into an area that no one else has really looked at or considered. That's how you move research forwards and this scope of inquiry forwards. And when I was first setting up this thesis, I thought what would be most helpful is if I kind of rewrote in an academic stamp of approval a lot of knowledge that maybe was already out there, other people had said, or tried to prove Bitcoin. But then after that conversation, I just said, okay, no, the better thing for me to do is to just dive into the unknown and explore that. And so it's why it's, really exciting. A couple months ago at the Bitcoin for Corporations conference at Strategy World, Kuro Kure, who's now the director, announced the launch of the Bitcoin Education Institute. And so through, the Bitcoin Education Institute, the Bitcoin Students Network, helping students push the current scope of knowledge and start thinking about our world in a new framework and a new lens is going to be really important.
If you live in Europe like I do and want to buy Bitcoin the right way, check out Relai. Relai is a Bitcoin-only platform with no distractions, no shitcoins, just a BTC. It's also the easiest way I've found to do what actually works, buying Bitcoin on a consistent basis. Relai is also self-custodial. They never have the keys to your Bitcoin. No freezing of your assets, no counterparty risk, no rug pulling whatsoever. I have been a long-term fan of Relai, not only because it's incredible, easy to use and very beginner friendly, but also because it just works. If you want to get started with Relai today, click the link down in the pinned comment or in the description, and once you have downloaded the app, type in Robin in the referral code section of the app to save 10% on fees. So set up your DCA Bitcoin plan today with the Relai app and get cheaper Bitcoin if you use code Robin. With Microseed, you can engrave your 12 or 24 word seed phrase, the entire seed phrase, onto a 1-inch small washer. Yes, just one washer. All 24 words on that one washer. You can hide that thing everywhere. And even better, you don't need to buy a new kit every time you have to get a new wallet. You can make unlimited backups because Microseed is not selling the washer. Microseed is selling the device that stamps the washer. So you get the full kit with the device, with the washers, with the hammer, with everything you need to get started today. And you can make with that unlimited amount of backups. Go now to microseed.io. Finally, we have BTC Prague back in 2026. And this year, I'm not only speaking on a panel, but I'm actually going to present an interesting new angle, a perspective, a Bitcoin thesis at BTC Prague this year for the first time ever. I've never done that on any other conference, so this will be a fun one. If you listen to this show on a regular basis, I would love to meet you in Prague this year. It's very high signal, no noise, and Prague is just a freaking amazing city with awesome drinks and a lot of good food. Use code Robin to get 10% off, and if you buy with Bitcoin, you get an additional 5% off your ticket price. I'll see you there in Prague. Make sure to come say hi. I think so too. It's really fascinating to think about it. By the way, you mentioned it. I think Robert Breedlove is currently still writing a book, and he explained it briefly, and I feel like he goes in a similar direction that what your paper went to. Obviously, I haven't read anything from what Robert Breedlove has written, but he just explained it to me briefly when I was with him in Miami, and it was the first time someone like I saw this like Bitcoin as a language. And it's fascinating. You already have a paper with 350 pages on that.
Yes, well, I'm equally excited to read his. And Andrew Bailey and I think Bradley Rettler have also written a piece in the Satoshi Papers on Bitcoin as a language that came out after my thesis as well. Or maybe it came out sooner, but I didn't have my copy of the book for a while. So it's exciting, people writing these, and we all push each other, forward.
It's really cool. Is yours also available as a book, by the way? Because people might be curious about it.
Yeah, so no, not yet. I'm happy to send anyone the PDF. I had some incredible thesis advisors, so Troy Cross, Sarah Krebs, and then Kaushik Basu, who was actually the economic advisor for India, and the economic advisor at the World Bank, who were on my committee. And they said, Ella, you sort of wrote 4 theses in one. This is a very large volume. And now I'm in process of figuring out how I best package this and perhaps edit it down, reformulate some of it.
So I guess you can make a 4-book series
Yeah.
and start that this year.
Yes. So we will see what it becomes.
Really cool. I want to dive into with you in the concept of Bitcoin as a social project also, because I think you have a very good understanding that maybe the social component of Bitcoin is even more important than just a technical one, because everyone can just copy the open source project and like have a second Bitcoin. But the social component behind Bitcoin, the origin story, how it grew, the network, and kind of the social layer of Bitcoin is probably the thing that makes it unique. At least I look at it. How do you look at Bitcoin from social versus the technical one?
I think you said it very well. If you don't have the network effect and the social layer of Bitcoin, then yes, in theory, it's possible someone could just copy the code and then they develop the network around it and the social layer around it. And so I think also, at the end of the day, it's people who decide which software implementation they want to run on their node. It's people who decide which consensus rules they would like to uphold. And it's people who write the software. And so my whole life, pre Bitcoin, I think my parents raised me with the idea that community is everything. And then as you learn more and more about Bitcoin, I do think the social layer, layer zero, if you will, is really instrumental. And it's why I've spent a lot of time and energy building the Bitcoin Club at Cornell, building the Bitcoin Students Network. It's a lot of what my role at strategy gets to focus on. And so I do think it's terribly important. And I also think that um, there's a couple when the Bitcoin ETFs were coming out and people were really, I would say, perhaps worried about the ETFs. Alex Thorne had a really good take in a podcast where someone asked, what's the greatest risk or threat to Bitcoin? And he cited something from Greg Maxwell, which was that it's apathy, people just not caring anymore. And so I think as we look to the future generations, it's really important that they understand why there's only 21 million, why Bitcoin is finite, why decisions have been made the way they have. I know you mentioned the block size wars. And then why they understand the larger picture of the world we're trying to build on a more sound, truthful basis so that then they can create the products that we will need as time progresses. Bitcoin never came in as a finished product necessarily. I really liked Gloria Chow's analogy about, what Bitcoin core maintainers do sometimes, and the thinking of Bitcoin as a bridge. And just like any real world structure bridge needs maintenance, or you can think of the whole Bitcoin industry perhaps somehow in that way. Like digital credit didn't exist until a year ago. And now it's helping, be a bridge, bring so much more capital and so many more people into this space. And so I do think the social layer is very important, as you mentioned, and why I've spent a lot of time over the past 5 years helping support it.
And I want to touch on, because I forgot that before with the strategy part, I want to touch on Stretch and digital credit just briefly later on.
Yeah.
But I find it so fascinating to talk about the social component because recently a friend told me, oh, but like Bitcoiners are very religious. And I'm like, yeah. And I think it's a good thing. I think Bitcoin wouldn't be that successful if it didn't had some religious aspects to it of like, hey, I just in Vienna, for example, we have restaurants that accept Bitcoin where people meet every month to get together and discuss Bitcoin. We have every Saturday, or like not every Saturday, like some Saturdays, Bitcoin walks that are organized, decentralized. That's just like a guy that I think started that in Scotland. I could be wrong where he started it, but I think Jacob is his name. But now all around the world, people started their own Bitcoin walks on their small Telegram groups where there's like 10, 15 people that just get together and walk together. If you just explain to people, hey, there's a group that organizes it and like has those walks and those meetups, it has religious aspects to it. It has kind of those things to it. But I think the thing that we are trying to do with Bitcoin would not be possible if we would not have those meetups, those walks, that social component, that religious thing that some people kind of slap onto Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I think how I think about it is we, and my mom has said this, Bitcoin as a value alignment tool, Bitcoin as this shared truth. And just like in religion, not everyone agrees over everything. But again, you see that higher purpose that you are trying to do. You see a sense of something greater than just yourself. I think that's all, religion teaches you that there's more to the world than just your, 6-foot ecosystem that you operate in. There's a bigger why to why you're put on earth. And so, I mean, I certainly feel and see that in Bitcoin. And you mentioned the community side, and I'll have to give a shout out to the Bitcoin district group here in the DMV area. When I moved here about 6 months ago, I knew my team and I knew the Bitcoin Policy Institute folks, but didn't know anyone else. And so it's been, a gift to be able to go to those meetups that they organize and meet some fellow Bitcoiners there.
It's actually a fun thing now because almost every major city that you move in now, if you're a Bitcoiner, just go to the local Bitcoin meetup and you meet like-minded people. It's almost a social club that is spread across the whole world that you can connect to wherever you are going. It's a fascinating,
Yeah.
aspect of Bitcoin.
Yes, yeah, and same for our Bitcoin hub at the office. We have about 35 members there, and I got to meet all of them and see them and hear what they're up to. And one even had us over for dinner at her home, which was so lovely. So it's a very special community we have.
Let's talk a little bit about how Bitcoin itself and the ecosystem around it has developed over the past 2 years. When we last spoke, I think the Bitcoin ETF hasn't been there. I
I
think,
think it
I don't know.
was I can't remember when we recorded. I know it came out around March, so we might have been about 2 months in, 2, 3 months in to the ETFs. I don't remember when exactly we recorded, but certainly early.
So it was around like the very starting of the ETF or right before it started around that ETF era. And then obviously strategy came around 8 months ago with stretch out, something like that.
It was July 2025, so yeah, we're pretty close to 1
And
year.
so what though all those, how should I call it? Those TradFi bridges between, or those bridges between TradFi and Bitcoin mean for it? Like, how do you look at the ecosystem that has been developing in 2024, 2025, now starting of 2026? How do you look at all those developments and bridges that we are kind of building in the ecosystem?
I see it as all positive. And I think if you take a step back first of why I believe in Bitcoin so strongly and why I feel it's so important, I see Bitcoin as this tool to unlock agency and human flourishing for all 8 billion people around the world. And for, what I've come to learn is that if you look at all of the capital around the world, so there's about, 900 trillion if we go back to Jesse Meyer's chart, much of that cannot necessarily just I know you use Relay, I love River, can't just go onto those apps and buy Bitcoin. And so what MSTR did, for a long time before IBIT came out, is it gave large allocators a way to have Bitcoin exposure, a way to have some of that, not necessarily private key agency necessarily, but an increase in, monetary wealth agency that they wouldn't have otherwise had. IBIT similarly, like if I think about my grandparents, they don't necessarily want to have self-custody Bitcoin or even custodial Bitcoin. They would rather just allocate, some portion of their brokerage account over to IBIT. So then they get to benefit from that. And now, if you think about, just the past year, there's been, it seems like a complete 180 in terms of, banks and new products and services that are being built around Bitcoin, much more positive infrastructure around Bitcoin. And if we think, for instance, let's just take Washington, D.C. to start with. I know Michael Saylor calls it the red wave. We have a much more amenable political stance towards Bitcoin. If you look even outside the US, I think in River's recent report, they showed it's up to about 18 nation states that own Bitcoin, but maybe 40 countries in general who are positive towards Bitcoin, only I think about 8 that have a negative stance towards Bitcoin. And so all of these different touch points I see as very positive. And now, as mentioned with Stretch and digital credit, it's just even further opening the doors for more people to come into this space.
I think so too. It's kind of fascinating because when I got into Bitcoin in 2020, it was not as clear how smooth the transition from into a Bitcoin or more Bitcoin friendly world will be, how fast nation states and corporations and institutions will adopt it. Because I came in, I think, just a couple of months before Strategy first bought Bitcoin. And so there wasn't even a publicly traded company when I first researched about Bitcoin that even had Bitcoin on the balance sheet. Now there's like, I think 200 or so,
Yeah.
which is fascinating to see. And now, not only that, but we went from having not a lot of political high level discussions around Bitcoin to having the president, the vice president going to Bitcoin conferences, which is
Yep.
absolutely absurd. When everyone that was there in 2020 and or like even around that time or earlier or a little bit later knows how crazy this was to think about, even to say, yeah, in 5 years, the president and the vice president will have been visited. Oh, that was wrong, but would have been already at the Bitcoin conference. And this thought was so crazy to think about. Like just like those things are happening. And now nation states don't really can fight it anymore. There's like too much support for it. And so the incentive flipped from, hey, let's fight it, to either we are neutral or we just adopt it or we embrace it even. Because if you fight it, you just drive the capital, the talent that Bitcoin now has out of the country. And this has been happening in Czech on a very small scale, for example, because I know the people that have done it from the BTC Prague team also. They really, really lobbied, for example, the 3-year rule, that after 3 years, the Bitcoin no longer have capital gains tax. And nobody cared before, but then the community jumped in, the Czech community, and all of a sudden politicians were like, oh, wow, there's so many people that care for that. We've seen the same thing with Trump and the Trump administration. A big reason why he endorsed Bitcoin is because he saw the voting power and also the donor power and all of those things. But I think more importantly, it's just crazy how far we've come and how strong the community is to push those things forward.
Yeah, and if you even look just maybe outside the president's immediate circle and the cabinet, but if you look recent headlines, Bitcoin perhaps being allowed in mortgages, or it is, but I think it's, the product's still quite new. If you look at, I believe the Department of Labor looked at, being able to expand the asset allocation choices in 401ks, perhaps including Bitcoin. You see the SEC and the CFTC coming together in a more positive way. So there's been lots of trickle-down effects. At our conference that I had mentioned prior, we saw TD, Morgan Stanley, Citi all making big announcements towards products they're looking at building out for Bitcoin. And many, many more banks. I think if the Basel framework can be adjusted, that'll be another catalyst. But in general, moving in the right direction.
I haven't even seen that. Fannie Mae just opened the door to a crypto-backed mortgage product. Interesting. I haven't even seen that headline.
So it's with Coinbase, and I believe it's called Better. I'm blanking on the second. Can't remember the second word in that name, but both of them together.
Yeah, Better and Milo, I think.
We'll have to fact check ourselves, but yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah, sorry for the small detour, but like I haven't heard about that. That's really interesting because like we talked about real estate before, and one part why real estate is quite powerful actually as a wealth building tool is because of the leverage. You can put 20%, 10%, sometimes even 3% down and get the whole home. And even if the home just makes 3% a year, it's a lot because you only put like 3% down. So like your principal actually grows quite substantially, and you borrow cheap money to buy the home. If now, I mean, that's now also for the real estate thing, but I think credit instruments and things around that will improve for Bitcoin substantially. And to be honest, like I feel like I rather, if I take a loan, and I kind of give someone money, and I have to choosing between they having real estate as a collateral or they having Bitcoin as a collateral, I take the Bitcoin all day long. Like Bitcoin, I can liquidate within like 10 minutes. I can do all of those things. Real estate, I have to kick out the family. Like I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So it's just such a way better collateral asset for every use of a credit. So I think it's just a
Mhm.
matter of time till this leverage products, those credit products really get developed. Even though I'm not a fan of credit itself, I'm just like buy Bitcoin or buy something and like don't leverage yourself too much. But like in general, like this ecosystem is way better suited than real estate, even though real estate has the way better ecosystem for that right now.
Yeah, yeah. Bitcoin's way more transparent, way more liquid than traditional.
Really cool. Let's talk about a different form of credit, digital credit. It's interesting because the name digital credit is can be confusing to some, might maybe because credit people are always, oh, I go to the bank and get some money and that's credit.
Mhm.
Maybe explain like what is Stretch, why the name digital credit, and how do you look at that?
Yeah, so let's start with digital capital. So if you think about, why strategy refers to Bitcoin as digital capital, well, let's just break up the words. The digital transformation of capital. Prior to Bitcoin, you didn't have this, asset that existed in cyberspace that anyone could own with 12 to 24 words, as you mentioned, auditable, immutable, secure, liquid, transparent. And so that's where the digital piece comes from, if we think about going from analog to digital. And then if you think about digital credit, well, this is doing, the same transformation of credit, but through the power of Bitcoin. And so if we, do a bit of a deep dive on Stretch, I think for the Bitcoiners that might be watching, an easy way to think about Stretch, is the first 11.5% of Bitcoin appreciation. We have the belief that Bitcoin will go up 30% ARR. And so to really believe in digital credit and to understand it, you first need to understand Bitcoin and have a belief in Bitcoin and Bitcoin's long-term future. And so then if we think about Stretch, perhaps going into maybe a bit more of the technicals, it's what's called a preferred equity instrument. And so it is equity. It's traded on, it's listed on NASDAQ. You can buy it on Cash App, Robinhood, any of your brokerage accounts. I know that you're in Europe, so you could use Interactive Brokers and maybe your European audience as well. They could buy Stretch anywhere that US listed stocks are available in Europe. And Stretch is designed to stay pegged at a $100 par value. And so if if you think about equity, like let's just think about MSTR, for instance, the price changes, it can go up and down. And that's how a lot of stocks, a lot of equities work, is that the price goes up and down, but then if there's a dividend, it's fixed. Now, what Stretch does, and this is different from our other preferred instruments as well, is it flips that. So it's designed to stay pegged to a par value of 100 cents, but then the dividend that's paid monthly can change. And this dividend, some other important points is that it's paid monthly in cash, and those dividends are classified as return of capital. which means that when you receive those dividends, you don't pay tax on that for about the first 10 years or so, until your cost basis goes to zero. And then you do pay tax, or if you pass it on to an heir, it resets. And so you can, let's just say, go up to another $100 if you owned one share.
The most important thing for your Bitcoin journey is not buying Bitcoin, but it's how to keep them. And yes, you have maybe the right tools, but how do you actually go ahead and stick it all together so it's the most secure for you personally? Self-custody is a deeply personalized journey, and the Bitcoin way is helping you exactly finding that correct setup for you personally. They are also helping you with securing your own cybersecurity. And if you want to go one step above all that, you can even get a consultation for a Plan B residency. Go to thebitcoinway.com/Robin and you will get a 30-minute free consultation. I finally and officially mine Bitcoin. This is not just something to stack more Satoshis, but it's most importantly also to support the network. Individual miners are the ones that keep the Bitcoin network decentralized. And by the way, you get KYC-free Bitcoin. That's why I use Simple Mining. I get an actual proper Bitcoin miner. They set it up for me. They repair it if it breaks down. And most importantly, they let me choose the pool and even connect my own full node. I'm completely sovereign and I'm completely in control, and I can sign up with Ocean, no account needed. I just give them a Bitcoin address and then there's mining going on. No KYC, nothing. So if you're ready to mine Bitcoin, go to simplemining.io, tell them you come from Robin, and let's mine Bitcoin together.
The tax deferred thing is a thing of beauty. I think it's different in Europe for the European people, but like most of my audience is anyways American. It's just something that I'm looking at. I'm like, I would love, I wish I would have the same advantage here, but the Europeans aren't as fun. But yeah, like in the end, you might have to still pay the tax. But the visual that made it very clear for me, I want to show this to you, is something that I think Seyr showed either in a presentation or in an earnings call. I'm not sure exactly where I saw it, but I just saw it and I made a screenshot because I found it extremely well to understand what Bitcoin actually, or like what Bitcoin, the digital capital, MSTR, the digital equity here, and SDRC, so stretch the digital credit here is. And I'm so fascinated by that because I'm maybe a lunatic. I like the volatility. I love the Bitcoin is going up and down. I love MSTR going up and down since I think December now. I'm also a strategy shareholder. I find digital credit extremely boring because it doesn't do anything except just paying me every month. But if I go ahead and tell some of my friends, my sister, my mom, like some of the other people in my life that are not as a lunatic like me, they're like, oh wait, 11%, that's freaking awesome. I would love that. I love the stability. I love the no volatility. Basically, they really like the high Sharpe ratio because like there's no volatility and there's still like an 11 point. I think now it's 11.5, so the screenshot is a bit old. It's not 11.25, it's 11.5 at the moment of this recording. And so if you look at many different, many other investments, like an S&P 500, you have the volatility and less return. It's like, why would anyone invest in all of those things? And then coming back once more to Jesse Myers, because he has just because we talked about him quite a lot. So he has his Twitter channel. Most of the stuff that we talked about is he also. But the pinned tweet that he has on there is amazing because he also shows how basically strategy has those pipes that make bonds, money, and equities kind of going into Bitcoin. I think that's also kind of my thesis around all capital, all that monetary premium that is stuck into real estate, into gold, into bonds, into equities, are kind of collapsing into Bitcoin, because most people don't invest in the S&P 500 because they want to be investors. They just want to flee really bad money. And so I just wanted to show you those two things, and want to kind of get your inputs on those two, because I find it so fascinating what strategy is doing and how well they're executing so far.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I agree. Those charts are both, I think very helpful. And Jesse's, especially this updated one. And so if you think about just going back to the first chart that you showed, what we've done with Stretch is, you said you like volatility, but in reality, a lot of people don't, or just simply cannot accept volatility. And so with Stretch, the idea is that we have stripped out the volatility. So right now, the volatility of Stretch is about 2%, but we want to get that down as low as possible. And so, you can, if you're looking at this, you can also really, we have another chart in this deck, align your duration. Maybe, if you're me, I have a long time ahead of me. I'm okay with the ups and downs of MSTR. And so I don't mind that. I do also own Stretch, but for instance, maybe your mom would prefer, or your sister would prefer Stretch over MSTR, or just Bitcoin as well. If you can own spot Bitcoin, that's what Strategy does every week, is we buy Bitcoin. But then if you're thinking about Stretch and digital credit, to the Jesse's chart that he showed as well, this allows us to, help open up more of the floodgates. So if you look at assets, there's about-ish 150 trillion, in equities, and then maybe 300-ish trillion in credit. And so our digital credit, this whole asset class, helps tap those markets. So pensions, endowments, RIAs, wealth managers, financial advisors, family offices, hedge funds, sovereign wealth funds can, all start to help find the instrument, again, powered by Bitcoin, that best suits their mandates.
Yeah, 100%. It's also a little bit of time horizon. I think time horizon is the right word, because you might have capital that you need in 5 months because you move and you need to buy some furniture or whatever your thing is. You have some capital that you need this month, this next 2 months, to buy groceries and small things that you buy every month, or like some utility bills, electronical things and stuff like that. And then you hopefully have capital that you can store away for 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. Maybe, especially for young people like us, we have capital that we want to store away for the next 40 years and don't touch that for most of our lives, as it's a security buffer. It's just a long-term capital accumulation. And so I love having Bitcoin and Strategy as kind of this 10, 20-year play, because I know I don't care about the short-term price. If it goes very low, it's just, for me, a signal, hey, let's work a little bit harder to get more capital in there. But there is some use cases for capital that you have short-term. And I think Stretch is an amazing product just to have as a cash extension. I mean, I'm not a fan of like completely eroding your cash reserves and just flipping it completely to Strategy. But I think as a cash equivalent, how do they say that word, equivalent? It is a very nice instrument. It's a really interesting thing for, you need money that you might need in 5 months, 2 months, maybe even next month, because you can go in and out pretty quickly, even in Europe and with those brokerages. I tried it out. It's super easy. The fees are also low, maybe not as low as in America. So I looked at it from my fee perspective. You do have to pay a good amount of it, because the fees otherwise eat a lot of the profits that you make from it. But everyone should make the calculation of like how much the fees are. And I guess in America it's probably cheaper because like you don't have to like the Forex things and stuff like that. But it's really interesting as a cash reserve, even for Bitcoiners that have most of it in Bitcoin.
Yeah. And to your some of your points, a lot of people around the world are looking for yield, and they're yield starved by the current options. And so Stretch, helps solve that very quickly. You could also think of it, at the end of every month, as long as you're in by the record date, which is the 15th of the month. You also have to make sure for anyone listening, if the 15th of the month is on a Friday, that you are then in a day earlier, because we have T+1 settlement. So you want to make sure you're recorded in the ledger, before the record date. And then, just to your points, I think it will really help a lot of people around the world. And one note as well is that it's not a cash equivalent. People should know that, or just make sure that that's clear. Just like if you have cash sitting in your checkings account or savings account, in theory, perhaps some of the risk is that the principal falls. We mentioned it is an equity. However, if you look at our balance sheet, it's backed by, there's 50, fluctuates, but about 50 billion of Bitcoin on Strategy's balance sheet. And then we have a USD reserve that launched as well. So there's 2.25 billion in the USD reserve. And if you also look at just the health of Strategy's balance sheet compared to other companies, or just the broader investable universe, Strategy's leverage is at about 10%, which is about half that of investment grade, rated companies, and maybe a third of perhaps junk bonds or other companies. So it's a very healthy balance sheet that Strategy has been able to create. And another reason is that's why we've also shifted off of issuing debt in the form of convertible notes that comes with a maturity risk, all in the interest of how can we do the best for equity and credit investors.
Interesting. It's a fascinating. I predict Stretch will be looked at as an historical important asset when people look back at Bitcoin in 20, 30, 50 years. It will take some time because people need to trust it. It will a thing like a Stretch lives from people trusting it, and so it will probably take some time for people to see it, some runway. How long can they pay the dividend? Is it 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? And the credit thing, I think they have. I've listened to the earnings call, but it has been a while. Some S&P 500, S&P rated, some credit rating that they achieved. What exactly was that?
Yep. So Strategy, historically the company has been rated in the past, but the management team went back and said, we want to get re-rated. And what is, quite crazy is that when we got re-rated by S&P, we were not given any credit for the Bitcoin on the balance sheet. So it was just like it didn't exist. And so, hopefully that will change over time, and we'll be able to receive credit for all of the Bitcoin on the balance sheet. But it's a start, and it's the first time that a Bitcoin treasury company was rated by the S&P. And I don't know if you had said or maybe insinuated that Stretch had a credit rating, but Stretch does not. MSTR Strategy does.
Yeah, absolutely. But it still got a decent rating, right? Like, was it a B minus? What was it?
Yeah, B minus. Yeah. So it's a starting point. It's a starting point.
And that B minus is completely without any Bitcoin. And that's crazy.
No Bitcoin. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. It's like if someone, if you're trying to get a mortgage or someone's evaluating you and they maybe only give you credit for the $5 in your wallet or something and don't give you any credit for the assets that you own.
It's a crazy thing to do in my opinion. But people can think about that themselves now. If they get without the 50 billion in Bitcoin and B minus, how amazing the rating would be if they get credit for all the Bitcoin they have, which is about I think a little over 3.5% of the total Bitcoin supply, especially if you're a Bitcoiner. You know what this means. Really cool. I've already, it's crazy. We're already at the 1 hour. I have so many more topics, but maybe just as before we get to the end routine of the podcast, is there anything more that is important for you to share? Anything that you feel like that wasn't covered nicely?
Oh, well, we've covered so much. We've got, some of the Cornell studies. I think, one to just put on people's radar, because I know we've talked about Bitcoin adoption and new entrants into this space. This coming spring, later this spring, early summer, we'll be publishing the results from the Cornell Bitcoin adoption study through the Brooks Tech Policy Institute. And so, just as a quick recap, this is the first study looking at Bitcoin adoption uniquely across 25 countries. So, this is 25,000 surveys that were done, and then as well interviews to supplement all of that data. And so normally when these studies have been done, they have just been crypto adoption indices. They haven't really separated out Bitcoin. And so this one will give us a good touch point of who's owning Bitcoin, why are they owning it, how are they owning it? So that's coming up. And then just a quick note on the Bitcoin Students Network as well, that if you're a student who happens to be listening, we'd love to have you join about 2,000 other students across 70 countries that are building clubs, beginning to enter this space in terms of jobs or internships. And so I know, Robin, when we spoke last, I don't even think it had launched yet. So just sharing those two notes as well.
Really cool. 2,000 students. That's an amazing accomplishment. Congratulations.
Well, I think the message of the day is that it's a team, in the Bitcoin space or any project or company that you're working on or for. And so Kyle Knight recently joined as our executive director of the Bitcoin Students Network. And then, as you know, Arsh Malu and I co-founded it back in March of 2024. So it's a team effort. And then we also have a great board as well.
Very humble. I love it. Thank you so much, Ella. We have an end routine, as you might know from 2 years ago, where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is.
Yeah.
And he asked you the question, what fact about Bitcoin is your favorite fact?
Oh, this is such a good question. Okay, well, I'll tell you the one that first comes to mind because as another common thread, I love history. And since we recently just passed this date, if you think about some important dates in Bitcoin, like Satoshi's birthday, April 5th, 1975. And if you look at then Executive Order 6102, and basically in the US, this order that came out and said, Americans, you have 1 month to turn in all of your gold. You can't own gold anymore. That I think is just always a fun fact to kind of tie to history. And maybe Satoshi did it on purpose, maybe not. But it was essentially April 5th, 1933. Government said you have 1 month until May, turn in all your gold. And then in 1975, that is when that EO was repealed. So his birthday, April 5th, 1975.
I love that fact. And I strongly believe that it was on purpose. Obviously, we can't know for sure, but a lot of coincidences are not coincidental there.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ella, for being on the podcast. Before I let you go, where can people find you, ask you questions, and reach out to you?
Yes, well, firstly, thank you, Robin, for having me back. It's been such a pleasure. Twitter, it's just 21mm for the 21st. That is my handle. You can reach out to me there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being on, Ella. And also thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back. This content is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial advice.